Hello again everyone and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic, a fun one. Let's do it. What's your creepiest, most unnerving story? Real or not? Creep us out. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. In the late 1970s, my uncle was studying medicine at the University of Chicago. After morning class, he decided that he would hitchhike back home to Lincoln Park on the north side instead of paying for a taxi. A man drove up in a Plymouth Satellite and offered my uncle a ride. The man looked normal and seemed friendly, lighthearted even, so my uncle got in the car and they started driving toward Lakeshore Drive. However, once they got there, the man drove south on Lakeshore instead of north toward Lincoln Park. My uncle told the man he was going the wrong way and to turn around and head north. The man looked at my uncle, put his hand on his knee, and said, "No, son, you're coming with me." He smiled darkly at him. My uncle froze in panic, and when they hit traffic near South Shore, he quickly unlocked the passenger door and ran away without looking back. A year or two later, on a cold December day, my uncle was having coffee in a cafe with my future aunt when he caught something on the TV that made his blood run cold. He saw the man who had picked him up from the school that day the year before. He had been arrested for the suspected armed killing of over 20 young men and boys. The man on the television was John Wayne Gacy, and he removed the door handle of the passenger side door to prevent the men he picked up from escaping. My 4-year-old daughter was supposedly asleep when I heard noises coming from her upstairs bedroom. I tried to listen but could not make out what was being said. I approached the room and she stopped talking. Thinking I had her alarmed, I went into the room. At the time, she was sharing it with her 3-year-old sister. I walked in and saw the 4-year-old sitting up in bed. I smiled and said, "Is everything okay?" She said, "Fine." But her sister said they were keeping her up. I asked, "Who?" My 4-year-old said, "Sorry, but that she was talking." When I asked her who she was talking to, my 3-year-old sat up and said, "The girl in the window said you were coming." After I shit a brick, I asked who the girl was, and they both said a girl comes and stands in the front of the window at night and talks to them. Not knowing what to say, I said, "Okay," tucked them in, and hung around outside their door. The next day I asked about the girl. They said she came back but was mad. I waited a few days and asked again. My 4-year-old said the girl in the window was still mad. I forgot about it for a week when my wife said, "Who are the girls talking to upstairs?" Freaked out, I ran upstairs and both girls were sitting under the window looking up. They turned and looked at me and asked if I wanted to meet the girl. When they turned around, disappointed, they said the girl had left. It has been about 5 years since then, and I've not heard about the girl in the window since then. Coffins used to be built with holes in them attached to 6 feet of copper tubing and a bell. The tubing would allow air for victims buried under the mistaken impression that they were dead. Harold, the Oakdale gravedigger, upon hearing a bell, went to see if children pretending to be spirits. Sometimes it was also the wind. This time it wasn't either. A voice from below begged and pleaded to be unburied. "You Sarah O'Bannon?" "Yes," the voice assured. "You were born on September 17th, 1827? "Yes." "The gravestone here says you died on February 19th. "No, I'm alive. It was a mistake. Dig me up, set me free." "Sorry about this, ma'am," Harold said, stepping on the bell to silence it and plugging up the copper tube with dirt. "But this is late August. Whatever you are down there, you ain't alive anymore, and you ain't coming up." During boarding school, this was making the rounds. Every boarding school has some odd tradition or skill a student must undertake before graduation. At my school it was knowing how to swim, and at my brother's it was ballroom dance lessons. Anyway, this specific school had a very outdoorsy tradition, and before graduation, students were required to spend a long weekend camping alone in the woods. A faculty member would drop the student off after classes on a Thursday and pick them up after the weekend. Most students looked forward to the experience as a calm spell before graduation week, with all the family drama and stress of moving out of school began. A girl is dropped off at the location and has a wonderful time all weekend. She writes in her journal. She takes tons of pictures. She sees lots of wildlife and relishes the calm away from the other people. She's very rested by the time she returns to campus. 2 weeks later, after the insanity of graduating and moving out of school, she develops her pictures from the trip. As she flips through the photos, she realizes the one whole roll of pictures is of her sleeping. In any city in any country, go to any mental institution or halfway house you can get yourself to. When you reach the front desk, ask to visit someone who calls himself the holder of the end. Should a look of childlike fear come over the worker's face, you will then be taken to a cell in the building. It will be in a deep, hidden section of the building. All you will hear is the sound of someone talking to themselves echoing through the halls. It is in a language that you will not understand, but your very soul will feel unspeakable fear. Should the talking stop at any time, stop and quickly say aloud, "I'm just passing through. I wish to talk." If you still hear silence, flee, leave. Do not stop for anything and do not go home. Don't stay at an inn, just keep moving. Sleep where your body drops. You will know in the morning if you've escaped. If the voice in the hall comes back after you utter those words, continue on. Upon reaching the cell, all you will see is a windowless room with a person in the corner speaking an unknown language and cradling something. The person will only respond to one question: what happens when they all come together? The person will then stare into your eyes and answer your question in horrifying detail. Many go mad in that very cell. Some disappear soon after the meeting, and a few end their lives. But most do the worst thing and look at the object in the person's hands. You will want to as well. Be warned that if you do, your death will be one of cruelty and unrelenting horror. Your death will be in that room, in that person's hands. That object is one of 2,538. They must never come together. Never. Did anyone actually listen to this and thought to themselves, okay, I'll try it? Because I'm reading it as I'm going through and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, yeah, I'll try it. I probably won't, but I might. A young girl is left home alone with only her dog to protect her. When night approaches, she locks all the doors and tries to lock all the windows, but one won't close. She decides to leave it unlocked and goes to bed. Her dog takes its customary place under the bed. In the dark of night, she awakens to a dripping sound coming from the bathroom. The girl is too scared to go check, so she reaches her hand under the bed. She feels a reassuring lick from her dog and falls back to sleep. She reawakens to the dripping sound, reaches her hand down to the dog where she feels the reassuring lick and falls back to sleep. Once more, she awakens to the dripping sound. She reaches her hand down and feels the lick of her dog. Now curious about the dripping sound, she gets up and slowly walks toward the bathroom. The dripping sound getting louder as she approaches. She reaches the bathroom and turns on the light. She's greeted by a horrific sight. Hanging from the shower nozzle is her dog with its throat slit open and its blood dripping into the bathtub. Something on the bathroom mirror catches her eyes and she turns around. Written on the bathroom mirror in her dog's blood are the words, "Humans can lick too." This one always creeped me right the F out as a kid. There was a hunter in the woods who, after a long day of hunting, was in the middle of an immense forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, he decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the increasingly oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin, small clearing. Realizing how dark it had grown, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. He approached and found the door ajar. Nobody was inside. The hunter flopped down on the single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around, he was surprised to see the walls adorned by many portraits, all painted in incredible detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred. Staring back, he grew increasingly uncomfortable. Making a concerted effort to ignore the many hateful faces, he turned to face the wall, and exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep. Face down in an unfamiliar bed, he turned, blinking in unexpected sunlight. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin had no portraits, only windows. I work on a ship. One night I was having a meal with my crewmates, including one guy, Kane, who had recently recovered from an illness. We enjoyed our dinner, excited that we'd be heading home soon. Suddenly, Kane started choking and shortly thereafter began convulsing wildly. We managed to pin him down and he was yelling. He then let out a loud scream and a large blood stain appeared beneath his shirt. Kane continued to yell in agonizing pain as a snake-like creature violently burst from his chest and scurried off. I'll never forget that night. This story, a story within a story, was told to me by a friend, Mark. During high school, Mark was over at his friend's house. We'll just call him Steve because I don't know his name. They were hanging out in Steve's room after just hanging up a poster of Limp Bizkit's Significant Other album cover that Steve had just bought. Minutes later, Steve's dad comes by and orders him to take the poster down immediately. When he asked his dad why, he said, "Never mind why, just listen to him and do it." Steve is pissed, but he listens to his dad and takes it down. Later, Steve asked his dad why he told him to take down the poster. This is the story he told him. "When I was young, your aunt, uncles, and I had to fall asleep on the floor in one room because we were very poor. One night, someone walked into the room, bent over my head, and asked me, 'Give me your soul.' I was so afraid I'd pretend to be asleep. This thing would ask me to give him my soul a few times, then get up and walk out of the room. This happened every other night until I reached my early teens. One night after he was walking away, I opened my eyes to see his face. What I saw was a thing with the body of a human. He wore a hood, and underneath the hood was the face of a lizard. A few years before you were born, we threw a Halloween party at our house with all of our family. We ran out of candy, so I drove to the local market to pick some more up. On the way there, I was listening to the radio, and they said to call in with your scariest story. I pulled over to the side of the road, called him on a payphone, and told the story of the lizard man over the air. When I got back home, I could hear someone crying. I went upstairs into my bedroom and saw my sister crying on the bed. I asked her what was wrong. She said, "I heard you on the radio." That happened to me too. One school day, a boy named Tom was sitting in class doing math. It was 6 more minutes until after school. As he was doing his homework, something caught his eye. His desk was next to the window, and he turned and looked at the grass outside. It looked like a picture. When school was over, he ran to the spot where he saw it. He ran fast so that no one else could grab it. He picked it up and smiled. It had a picture of the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. She had a dress with tights on and red shoes, and her hand was formed into a peace sign. She was so beautiful he wanted to meet her. So he ran all over the school and asked everyone if they knew her or had ever seen her before. But everyone he asked said no. He was devastated. When he was home, he asked his older sister if she knew the girl, but unfortunately she said no. It was very late, so Tom walked up the stairs, placed the picture on his bedside table, and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, Tom was awakened by a tap on his window. It was a nail tapping. He got scared. After the tapping, he heard a giggle. He saw a shadow near his window, so he got out of bed, walked toward the window, opened it up, and followed the giggling. By the time he reached it, it was gone. The next day again, he asked his neighbors if they knew her. Everybody said, "Sorry, no." When his mother came home, he even asked her if she knew her. She said no. He went to his room, placed the picture on his desk, and fell asleep. Once again, he was awakened by a tapping. He took the picture and followed the giggling. He walked across the road when suddenly he got hit by a car. He was dead with the picture in his hand. The driver got out of the car and tried to help him, but it was too late. Suddenly, he saw the picture and picked it up. He saw a cute girl holding up 3 fingers. About 2 years ago, I had a roommate who told me this story. She used to work at a hotel in her hometown, somewhat smaller city, somewhat more north. A lot of girls she worked with were in high school as well, and a few of them were kind of slutty. One weekend, one of her promiscuous co-workers, let's call her Lindsay, gave a BJ to some guy at a house party. A day or two afterward, while at work, Lindsay noticed she had a rash developing around her mouth. She shrugged it off, hoping it would go away, but after a couple days, the rash got much worse. She finally decided to go to the doctor. The doctor had no idea what it was by just looking at it, but he took a couple of samples and told her that he would be back once the test results came in. Later on that day, the doctor called Lindsay and said, "We need you to come back to the hospital right now." When Lindsay got back, the doctor said to her, "You've got to tell me what you have been doing, because what you have around your mouth is contracted from dead people. It turned out the family of the guy she gave head to owns a funeral home business, and the guy had been effing the corpses. The funeral home has since been shut down. True story. It was 1933 and she was 13, living in the middle of Manchester, England. One night she got out of bed to go to the bathroom, and as she wandered through past the staircase, she saw her auntie standing at the top looking out the window. Curious, she trotted upstairs and stood next to see what she was looking at, but only saw the back garden and the alleyway out the back. She turned to ask her auntie what she was looking at, only to see a nebulous, faceless figure staring back down at her. The figure then reached out her hands and gripped my young grandmother's face. The next thing my grandmother remembers is her older brother, about 27, running down the hall toward them, picking her up and carrying her to the nearest room. She then spent the next week in and out of consciousness, but now without a sense of smell. Her family insists it was all a hallucination caused by a severe case of influenza, which is probably true. But my grandmother said she never felt safe in that house ever again. She moved to New Zealand about 10 years later and only ever returned to England and that house once before she died.